So for today, we're going to discuss layout. So websites often display content in multiple columns, similar to a magazine or newspaper. So there's different ways that you can accomplish having a multi-column layout. One way is to use the float property, which I think we've gone over in class before. Was that? Yeah. Guys? Okay. So the float property we've gone over pretty much lets you move elements left or right. It's easy to use, but can possibly affect the document flow of your HTML, which, you know, if you have a lot of floats going on in your code, it could lead to problems down the line. You can also use CSS frameworks. They're fast and easy to use most of the time, but they're limited to library features. How many people have used CSS frameworks before? How many people have heard of like Bootstrap, Bulma? Which ones have you used before?
I'm currently trying to learn Bootstrap.
Bootstrap 3 or 4? 4? Good. Yeah, Bootstrap 4 was just recently released. I think the biggest addition to it was the Flexbox. I think most of the widgets now, they use Flexbox, which is the next item I have on here.
So I don't really fully understand like what it is. Is it like an IDE for web development, or like is it just like a CSS API that you can just like link to?
It's essentially that. It's like a library that provides you a bunch of widgets essentially that you can use. We're actually going to go over a little bit of that today. I have a little thing for like how those types of libraries come about. It's a collection of just a lot of styles put together with possibly JavaScript added in to like do some of like the fancy, like you see like animations, having little pop-up boxes or having things move in and out from like say like the left or the right. But yeah, it's usually a library that you would just put into your project. Excuse me. Just talk through chat, like trying to. No, it's all right. I'm just No, it's fine. Yeah, I'm just trying to, because we got, I got to get through. We're going over layouts today and responsive design. I just want to get through it because I think today stuff we're talking about is probably the stuff you guys actually want to learn when you take a web design class like this. To talk about layouts and creating a responsive website. So, like I said before, layouts usually have multi-column format. These are the different types of ways you can create a multi-column layout. One thing that you should not use are HTML tables, and I've talked about this before. HTML tables do not preserve your layout when going to different types of devices, and they should really only be used to display tabular data because they do not allow you to reflow content dynamically. So HTML5 offers new semantic elements, define different parts of a web page. I think you guys see this a lot. You have usually a header, you have a nav bar, sections, articles, and a side. Sometimes you'll see like a page will have like a side navigation bar, and a lot of times you also see a footer. What do you usually see in the footer of a page? What types of, yes? Copyright, right? What else? Terms and policies, good. Yep, that's in there too. Another navigation bar. Anything else? About disclaimers. This site contains sensitive data. Please use it at your own risk, right? Types of little warnings. But yeah, so that's normally the types of things that you'll see, typical layout looks something similar to that. And then, so you have your layout, and then you also have little widgets that you usually have, on the page, like we were just talking about before with CSS frameworks like Bootstrap and I think Foundation's another popular one, Balma. The way they create these types of frameworks, they use a lot of common CSS properties. They'll use the cursor property to change the cursor icon, border radius, which is, it changes the curvature of the box corners of your element, which I'll show you in a minute. Box shadow draws a kind of like a silhouette. You actually will set the offset for it for your element, and then it'll draw a little box around it, giving it like a shadow effect. And then you also have transform, which I think some of you might have used in your last assignment we were talking about. Transform lets you essentially perform geometric coordinate changes. You can move, scale, or shear an entire element. So, for example, you could say something like y dash translate, and then put a x and y coordinate in, and it'll actually move the element based on the coordinates that you put in. You also have selectors, CSS selectors. You have the active selector, so this actually will take effect when an element is clicked on, or it's the active element that that you clicked on the page. You also have the hover event. That's used for when the mouse moves over it. You also can insert things after the content of each element. So you have after and before, and that's used usually to add elements before or after the element there. So I have a couple of examples here. So this example is just a basic layout example here. I'll just do this in full screen mode so you can see here you have your header. We have a little on the side here, some content, and then the footer here, which is your copyright that you usually have for these types of pages. Go back to editor view. You can see here in this example here, actually using the header and footer. And the other nice thing that it lets you do, when you use these type of elements, it looks a little cleaner in your CSS here. So like the CSS, I define both the header and the footer to have the same type of style, and then your nav elements and the article and whatnot. So it just makes things easier when you go to code it later in CSS. Just another type of attribute or tag to use. So this example here, this goes over the different CSS buttons here. So for here, this is an example of using CSS inheritance. So I have defined here a generic button style, and that button here is this one on the left side. And then if you look, I have for the next one button and then the class press, right? So who remembers, so from the class where we talked about CSS here with the inheritance, right? If you remember, so what will happen is it'll first take the attributes from the button class, and then next look for, so this is more specific, button.press, which is what we have here. Bless you. And what will happen is this will actually overwrite the original button class there. And then you can see I used the different selectors, hover and active. So then what will happen is, so when I hover over it, it'll change the background color to the new, the darker shade color. and then when I click on it, it does this. If you look here, changes the background. Well, it keeps it the same, really, the same background color. If I wanted to, I could have it where I say we do 3, right? And I go and I click. It's hard to tell the difference there, but but what it's going to do is it changes the box shadow, and it also moves it down 4 pixels to give it that effect that, you know, I'm clicking on a physical button here. And then, so then you can do that too with these other types of classes. So then I have a hover, button hover class, and a button ripple class. And if we go to button hover, right, this one here, this one has a span within it, so I have some additional things for the span. So when I hover over the span element, what will happen is it's going to change the cursor to become a pointer, right? And then it does this transition, and then if you notice here, button hover span after, that's where it adds in this content here. So on that event, it's going to go and add in, so this is this is doing an escape here. So it's actually, that's where the 2 hours are coming from this here. And then it moves it over to the right, 20 pixels to make it, you know, shift over and change the positioning and whatnot. And then same thing happens too with the ripple. And the ripple, it's doing a, when I click on it, right, it does this, this ripple effect, which is essentially just manipulating the content inside of the element and playing this transition here, which is super fast. So that's why it's like, oh, and also you also have this important attribute. So when you have the exclamation sign important, what that's doing is saying, you know, override, you know, any type of inheritance. It's a last-ditch effort to try to, like, beat out the selector. It's not recommended to use it most of the time. Usually you want to make sure your CSS is defined properly where, you know, the inheritance happens correctly, but you can use this as a last-ditch effort if you have some sort of selector you can't figure out that's beating out the selector you want to take effect. You can throw in this exclamation point, important, to override it. Any questions on this? Mm-hmm. Yep. Yep, this is kind of how JButton works. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And then next week, too, I'll cover how you can use JavaScript, too, because I think JButton probably has stuff for, like, events. So, like, when you click on, so when you actually click, so this is primarily focused on the visual, you know, display of it. You can have it, too, where when you click on it, an event fires off and something happens, like, you know, like, say, you know, something on the page moves or it makes some sort of request or whatnot. And those are events, and I'll cover that next week because I think next week's topic is advanced layout. But yeah, so essentially this is how JButton or Bootstrap or all those other types of frameworks kind of work. This is like a small little snippet of how they usually set up their style frameworks there. Any other questions? No? Okay. Cool. So now we get into responsive design. So responsive design is where you're making your web page look good on all devices, desktops, tablets, phones, etc. It's, you're really trying to make your page, resolution independent, and you're using HTML and CSS to resize, hide, shrink, enlarge, or move the content to make it look good on any size screen. So you have different types of things you can use, properties you can use. That's right. So you can use so the most important one is when you're doing a responsive page, first thing you want to set is the viewport and the meta, which I'll go over next. Then you'll have the max width property, which is, I think we were talking about that with the images. That's something you would use for in your responsive layout, setting the max width property on certain elements so that when the size changes or when you go to something with a certain size, use this type of either styling or even possibly use this image. You could swap out images based on the size of the screen that you're on. You also have text. You also have font size parameters that could be set to the viewport. I don't find this usually this isn't really that important, but I figured I'd cover it anyway. Then the biggest thing is the media queries, which is probably, how many people have heard of CSS media queries before? No? Okay, good. So this would be the first time that you heard of it. So viewport. So making responsive web pages, this is the first. This is what you want to put in your meta tag here. Now in CodePen, there's actually a section that you can use, and I believe this was the correct way to do this. So in CodePen, what you want to do in your pen is go to Settings, and then Stuff for the head. You can literally click this button, and it just throws that code in there. So like if I take it out, delete it out, and hit that button, it just adds it right in there. And that's because when you go to try to debug it later, you'll see actually if you were to use like the Chrome developer tools, it's actually not, when you have it in this like section here, when you actually put the meta in this section, it doesn't actually put it in the correct spot in the rendered HTML, so you have to use that settings thing there to actually set it properly. So what this does is it tells the page essentially, gives it instructions on how to control the page dimensions and the scaling of things. So the width equals device width. We'll set the width to be the size of the current screen. So which varies on different devices, and it also will depend too if you have it in landscape or portrait mode, because you have some devices like tablets and phones where you can actually turn the device and then the whole page will actually shift, you know, with the device when you move it. So that's also why too it's important to set that. And then the initial scale equals 1.0 sets the zoom level. Sometimes when you're troubleshooting, sometimes you may have to, depending on the device, actually change the scale level to say like 0.92 or something. If you're trying to get something to work that was that broke backwards compatibility, sometimes you'll set that scale level. Yes. You're gonna. So when you're coding these, like it's going to be when you code the media queries and when you do the max, what did I say? Max height, I think. You're going to go based off. So yeah, that's. You have to go based off of the size in pixels and the width. So you have to like target actually specific devices. It's tough to do because, or at least now it is, because now you have all sorts. You have like the Note 8, right, which is like the phablets, right? You have, the smaller, was it the iPhone, SEs, right? You have tablets now that, are varying, types of sizes. So it's, normally, I believe, most of the time you're setting, you'll have usually three different sizes. You'll have the desktop, which is I think usually above 1600 or 1200 pixels, depending on, what you've decided is desktop, right? And then between desktop, right, you'll have desktop to tablet, which sometimes people will say is, under, say, 1200 pixels, but above 768 pixels, right? I think that was the size of the iPad, I think. That was the common used size when it was in portrait mode, I want to say. Portrait or portrait mode. Because landscape, I think it was does anybody know the iPad dimensions? No. I think it's 768 by 1024 or something. Yep, well now there is. But when so now, so this was, you got to remember too, responsive design really, I felt came out when the tablets became big. When that iPad first came out, I think that was what a lot of people were setting these sizes to, the standard size of and then what happened was the tablet industry and the phone industry exploded, and now it's just it's just a jumbled mess of. So it's really, you really need to know what devices you're going to target ahead of time. What are the common phone sizes. Yep, which is, that's the media queries taken into effect. So as you're shrinking it, on your in your browser, right, you're making the width or the height smaller if they've programmed it to the height. Most people just go by the width because height's usually going to be infinite or soon to be infinite, because you want to be able to scroll vertically, which is what I'll get to next. Is your main goal is usually to prevent the content from overflowing horizontally, where the user has to horizontally go back and forth like this. You want it where they're scrolling up and down, because that's what most people are used to, is just scrolling up and down, usually on the phone or maybe even the tablet, right? Usually you start with the most common ones, and then you usually go through some sort of testing, and then if you find in your testing you're having a lot of people that are using this device that has this this dimensions, then usually you'll add in an additional rule. That's really a set of rules, just like, you have your CSS rules, so you're going to add another rule in to accommodate for that new device dimension there. Well, what we're just talking about, there's so many now. You have different size tablets, right? You have 7-inch tablets, 8-inch tablets, 10-inch tablets, 9-inch tablets, right? Then you have different size phones. You have the smaller, like an iPhone SE, or the iPhone, what do they have now, 8 Plus, or iPhone 10. What's that? They'll probably have a lot of rules. Yeah, they'll have. And then on top of just the CSS rules, there's also browser-specific rules. So sometimes, I think I have one example where I use the WebKit rule, where it's I'm saying, I think it's for a transition or something, to use sometimes browsers, they won't use the standard transform method. It'll be x-WebKit transform, and you have to throw that rule in. If you go to something like Amazon, they'll probably have every single thing they can possibly think of for. What's that? Well, I mean, yeah, so yeah, it could be infinite, right? But yeah, most of the time they're gonna set up the rules where it fits within certain, like it'll still look good even if, like say you went for, because the other thing too is most of these devices, they'll only be like, off by, I don't know, say like 50 pixels or something, or 30 pixels, and it won't make too much of a difference. Which is, and then that's too why like the prior stuff we were talking about with like, floats and widths, and next week I'm going to talk about Flexbox. I think Flexbox came out because of this, so that it was when stuff got displayed, it was in a more predictable manner. You didn't have to come up with these ridiculous set of rules for everything. But yeah, but like I said, the goal is to have the page scroll vertically, not horizontally. And then this is an example of what happens when, I'm not going to go through the pen, you go through. The other thing too to note with some of this stuff, actually I will open this up real quick, is it's sometimes pretty hard to, like even, so most browsers will have like a mode where you can actually like see what it looks like in a, like in Safari you have enter response design mode, and then you have this like selection you can do here. And sometimes it doesn't actually show properly what the, like it's not a true representation of what's really happening. So this is Safari, right? If I go to, copy this link, if I go to Chrome here, and in Chrome, do the same thing. In Chrome, there's actually like a little button you can hit. Where is it at here? It's under View, Developer. There's a little button you can hit here. So this is, I probably have the view thing turned on. So if I go, I get out of this mode here. How do I get out of this mode?
You can like centralize the segments to the center, right? That's what I'm looking at. Like at home, I have like a 21 by 9 monitor that's like 3440 by 1440.
Uh-huh.
Like the standard bar, but like when I enlarge websites,
Uh-huh.
it's just white space inside most of the time.
When you enlarge, was that on the desktop, you mean?
Yeah.
This is for when you, so this happens when usually you're going from so like you design for a big site and then you're going on to like a small device, like the phone, yeah. So like on the phone, like if we look at the picture here, right, when you first visit the page, it's showing, it's not zoomed in. So like when you go to zoom, so it's like it's not formatting it into where it's like a more condensed view for you here. Like so the width is being set. I think on here on the left side the width is being set to I'm not even sure what, some arbitrary, some like width in pixels larger than the phone current width. Versus the one on the right, you're initially setting the width to be the device width, and the zoom level as well to be at 100%. It's hard. It's really hard to show unless you actually like do it on the device. So here I think I have it set. What I was about to do was if I go to, was it back to editor view, settings? Okay, so no, I don't have it set here. And I believe, wait a minute, if I scroll over, no. You'll just have to take my word for it. But yeah, so that's why too I have this picture up here. It was hard to replicate it. I know a few times when I was testing this out, with the code pen, I had a hard time getting it to where, and like I said too, these little tools, I mean, they're good, they're nice to use sometimes, just so that you have a quick way of going and testing out your CSS rules, but sometimes they're not completely accurate, and it's usually best to actually test it out on the device that you plan on viewing the page on. It's just the nature of things. So the max width property, so elements only display when the browser window is below the defined max width. So this lets you pretty much hide and show elements based on the size of the screen. So one example you can use this for is to swap out high resolution image when you're on on a desktop browser versus a lower resolution image when you're on a smaller device. And then I have a pen here that shows that example. So on here, if we change this to, so on here, using the picture element, and I have 3 different source tags here. And then what's going to happen is, based on the width of the page, so I think right now we're at this width here. We're at 1500 pixels. So if we go into the way you can, so this is what's good when you use that responsive design mode. If I enter this mode here, I can then go and adjust. Let's just change this to be, whoops, wrong one. I just want to set this to full screen view. No, that wasn't it. Oh, change view. Full page. Do that again. Right. So this is what's convenient with these types of tools is, so now I can like set the width, right? And now, so I'm, what was I at there? That's at in the upper. So I'm at set. So that was what I was talking about. So when so if you're viewing this on, say, like a monitor that's, I don't know, say 1980 by 1024, right? So this will be the picture. So you can have like, really this is to show like, you really use this with the same picture, right? But at different resolutions. So like, yeah, you would use this to change like the, so now as it gets smaller, right, I'm adjusting the picture to be a lower resolution picture, and then eventually I'm shrinking it down, and now it's a completely different picture, right? Well, I'm using different pictures. Most of the time it's going to be the same picture, but at you know, different resolutions to fit the device that you're on, essentially. Does that make sense? Well, yeah. Okay. Any questions about that? No. Okay. So that's the max width property. You also have responsive text. This is the VW. Pretty much all it does is it sets a size, and then, you know, no matter what device you're on, it's going to look roughly the same size. You know, if you set it to a large unit, it's going to stay that size no matter what. So the viewport is the browser window size. So 1 VW is roughly 1% of the viewport width. So if the viewport is 50 centimeters wide, 1 VW is 0.5 centimeters. And you can also use it with the EM, remember or EMS. And then this was, I forget which week it was, but this was the way you can do, you also use this for like setting widths too. You can do like the calc function. This is in CSS3. So essentially it's going to take, usually I use it, you can actually use this in conjunction with like percentage. So you can say like calculate 100% width minus I don't know, 50 pixels, and then it'll, whatever it is, it'll just subtract it and give you that as the, so it's not font size, but like if you're doing like some sort of like margin or something, like setting a margin or some sort of padding or doing something with width, you can actually use that calc function to do that. And this is the example here I have, so we can just see in here. Let's shrink this. Just really just not really much to see here. It just changes along with the, yeah, because normally when you have that at the text normally doesn't follow, right, the size of the font there. Usually it'll stay the same size when you're resizing. So that's the VW, and then you have media queries, which are, you know, probably the most important thing that, when you're making a responsive website. So with media queries, you can define completely different styles of the page based on the, you know, the dimensions of the device that's viewing it. So, for example, if you have a user viewing a page with a sidebar, you can have the device is under a certain width, right? So if you have a sidebar that's taking, I don't know, 50 pixels up, and, you know, your device is, you know, the width on it at the time is, you know, 150, or say even 100 pixels, your sidebar is taking up 50% of the real estate there, you know, just on that left side. So normally, you know, in that scenario, you want to either get it out of there completely or move it to the top or something. Usually you try to have it stacked, so most of the time, something like that, you have it move up to the top. So this is an example I have here with how that works. So, so this is that same example we had earlier with the layout, right? And I changed it so that when you hover over, you know, it has a little thing here. But then if you were to go and adjust the, so let me go into change view, full page, and responsive mode. So now look what happened when I shrunk the window, right? Instead of it continuing to take up real estate on the left after, I think it was like, what did I say, 600 pixels or something, or no, 500, I think, something like that. After a certain amount of pixels, it's going to go and change the styling of this so that instead of it being on the left, you know, floating to the left, it's going to stack up on top there, and it's doing that through the media queries here. So if we go back to the CSS for it, come on now. Oh. Change view, editor view. Right, so it's really affecting the nav here. So this is the default nav, this is the original nav settings that we had, and then you have this rule, the @media, right? So this is what I'll get to in the next slide. So you have the @media, right, and this is only for screens. So you can have screens. You can have it where this only shows up when you say print the page. So like, for example, I use this a lot too. When you go to print something out, you go to print a web page out, a lot of the times people are printing out either in, you know, 8.5 by 11, or which is the, you know, typical letter size of a page, or they may be printing it out in landscape, right? And you can have it where you have special styling in there that's targeting just when the page is being printed, so that your web page, you know, looks consistent or looks good, you know, on a 8.5 by 11 page, you know, being printed out. So here what I'm doing is I'm setting the float to none, right, to take it out from instead of floating to the left, taking that out, changing the width, and then the margin there. And to get these items here to then become horizontal going across, we're having each list element float to the left, which is why when we shrank it and it did that, flip over, we're removing the float left for the whole list and then adding float left for the list items. And then for the article originally, if you noticed, the article had some sort of margin set for it. Where is it at here? Yeah, margin left 150 pixels, and that's to accommodate for the actual sidebar there. So then when we're going to shrink it, we're removing that margin so that it then shifts over to the left side and takes up the majority of the page, or the entire page, really, width-wise. Any questions on this? So I'll actually have some slides, too, that go over each one of those types of rules. So for media queries, you're going to have it's going to start out with the @media tag, and then you're going to specify the media type, and then put in essentially a bunch of and or statements that give you your width rules. So you have all. So if you say media type all, it's going to apply to all types of devices. Print, like I said before, print is only for printers. Screen is for computer screens, tablets, smartphones, etc. And you also have speech readers, which I've never really used before, but if you're making something that's accessible, what's that? On Canvas, is it's speech reader compatible, Canvas? Oh, okay. With the that's right. Yeah. I'll admit I'm guilty. I don't make a lot of accessible. It's something that I'm trying to work on. So you can specify different. I think it probably lets you change the order of how things get read, I would assume, on the page if you were to use the speech tab or the speech type. So you have min width, min height, max width, max height, and you're going to use that in conjunction with the and or type of rules. Pretty much self-explanatory. You can also say the orientation. So this is going to apply for when it's a tablet or a phone, because you can have landscape or portrait mode. You can also have aspect ratio. So if you're on a, like, say, a 4:3 type of device, or a 16:9, or whatever, you can define specific styles based on the aspect ratio, resolution, obviously, and then just general width and height. You usually don't see this too well. Sometimes you use this when, like I said, it's a specific type of device that's giving you problems, and when it's at a certain width, you want it to do something like, say, remove an element. Sometimes you'll use that property. Any questions? No? Kind of went through that fast, but so I have an exercise. You don't have to do it here. You can do it at home. But just to play around with the media queries, just create one and, just play around with it and see what you can come up with. But that was pretty much all I had for today. I'll extend the deadline for last week's assignment for the images. So we had that bit of confusion. I'll extend it to Wednesday, because it sounds like most of you had. It was just like one or two questions, right? They had issues with. What was that? You got it in? Good. Nice. Yeah, but I'll like I said, I'll extend it to Wednesday anyway.